My name is Danielle. I was 28 when my parents told the pastor I shouldn't speak at my sister's funeral. At first, I thought I misheard. We were standing in the church's side office, the kind with mismatched chairs and carpet worn from decades of hard shoes and quiet heartbreak. The pastor, Reverend Miles, was adjusting the order of service on a clipboard when my mom stepped in beside him and gently reached across the page. "Oh, we're actually keeping it very tight," she said, her smile soft, practiced. "Crystal's fiancé will do the main eulogy and I'll say a few words. Then we'll close with a reading." My dad nodded beside her, jaw set, silent as usual. I stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing the second reading." Reverend Miles blinked at the paper. "Yes, that's what I have here." My mother laughed lightly, patting his arm. "That was before we finalized things. It's just been overwhelming." She didn't look at me. No one did. It was as if I had floated in behind them, uninvited to the conversation about my own sister's goodbye. I left the room quietly, saying nothing. My heels echoed across the polished floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. Outside the sanctuary, I leaned against a stained glass wall and stared at the colors. Amber, deep blue, crimson. My sister loved crimson. She once dyed her hair that exact shade the summer before college, just to spite my mom's rules about natural presentation. I helped her do it in the garage, both of us giggling behind towels, even though I was too scared to try it myself. That was before she got sick, before everything quieted between us into careful texts and canceled visits, before Mom started using words like clarity and protective space whenever I asked why I wasn't included in Crystal's care discussions. I closed my eyes and took a breath. The church was cold, not the kind of cold you notice at first, subtle, creeping, like something you're supposed to ignore until it settles deep in your skin. Back in the front rows, volunteers were laying programs on chairs. I peeked over one, just enough to see the cover. "In loving memory of Crystal Renee Monroe." There was a photo, one I didn't recognize. She was smiling in a field of sunflowers. Hair tied back, eyes squinting, radiant. I turned the page. The schedule listed 4 names. None were mine. I sat down in the back pew, not even my place, but close enough to feel something real. A few feet away, my cousin Sarah was arranging flowers on the altar. She waved gently when she saw me, then hesitated. "Your mom said you'd be sitting with extended family," she said. "So I left space up front, but—" "It's fine," I interrupted. It wasn't, but I couldn't bring myself to make a scene in a place meant for silence. I just nodded, and she left. 10 minutes passed, then 30. Guests began arriving. Whispers, hugs, mascara already smudged. I stayed where I was. I didn't move when my mother glanced back and frowned. I didn't move when Dad followed her with his eyes, then looked away. I didn't move when the music started. Because if they could erase me from her funeral, then maybe I needed to decide what I would erase from them. After the service, people floated through the reception hall like petals on wind. Soft voices. Squeaky shoes on tile, folding tables with paper napkins in Crystal's favorite color, clay rose. I wandered toward the display near the punch table. It was supposed to be a memory station, a trifold board with photos, quotes, and shared moments. Someone had arranged it like a wedding slideshow, but slower, heavier, and strangely selective. There were photos from high school, Crystal in her prom dress, arms around her friends. There were photos from her scholarship dinner, her trip to the coast, even one from a camping trip she took with Mom and Dad last year. I hadn't been invited to that one, and nowhere was I in any of them. Not as a kid, not as a teen, not even from the dozens of holidays we'd spent in the same room. I blinked, scanning again. Maybe I missed something? No, it was intentional, like I'd been surgically cropped out of her life. I reached out and touched the corner of a print, her 18th birthday, the one where I'd made the cake myself. I remembered the candles. The frosting letters had slid a little because I'd added too much almond extract. That photo, it was there, but it had been zoomed in, just her, laughing over the candles. I had been standing right beside her, and now, gone. A sharp voice interrupted my thoughts. "Please don't rearrange anything," my mother said behind me. I turned slowly. She held a plastic plate with 2 lemon squares and a perfect napkin fold. Her eyes didn't match the gentle tone of her voice. I said. "I just noticed." "It's been a very emotional day," she cut in. "Let's not make it harder." I clenched my jaw. "Harder for who?" She tilted her head. "You know what I mean." I looked back at the board. She was my sister. She still is, she replied. You don't have to prove anything, Danielle. But that was just it. They'd already decided I had to prove everything. I turned away, walked to the far corner where the donation box sat near a stack of printed memorial cards. Each card had a quote from Crystal's final social media post, her name in cursive, and a message. She brought light wherever she went. I flipped one over. Someone had written a note on the back. Still can't believe you're gone. We weren't close, but I always admired you. It was signed with a heart and an unfamiliar name. I scanned the table again. There was a floral arrangement behind the basket, slightly tilted. Something glinted behind it. I stepped closer. Tucked behind the box, almost hidden, was a small frame. Not silver, not curated, just a cheap wood border. Slightly scratched. Inside it, a photo. Crystal and me. Both of us on a couch in our pajamas, no makeup, laughing so hard we were blurred. A candid I'd taken years ago on her old camera. She used to call it our worst and best picture. I picked it up slowly. No caption, no label, just left there behind the flowers like someone had tried to hide it or someone had tried to sneak it in. I held it to my chest. For the first time that day, I felt real grief rise, not from erasure, but from memory, from truth. Someone had remembered us, someone who knew we were real. I turned back toward the reception and I began to scan the faces. Because whoever brought this photo wasn't done speaking either. The framed photo trembled slightly in my hands as I moved toward the bouquet table. I kept it close to my chest, half hidden beneath my coat like something sacred. People were chatting now, the reception fully in motion, small talk with undertones of exhaustion. My mother stood near the piano with Crystal's fiancé, laughing too lightly. I spotted Dad stacking disposable cups like they were a task he could control. They didn't notice me, or didn't care to. At the edge of the floral table, I crouched slightly. The flower arrangements were arranged meticulously, but one stood out. Bright hydrangeas in a glossy black vase. Too modern, too bold for a Monroe family memorial. The card attached read, "She made things better without even trying. Some people just do." There was a name signed at the bottom, not Kira, not Crystal's work friends, not even extended family. It said, CN, 2 initials, nothing more. But my fingers curled instinctively. I'd seen that handwriting before. Back when Crystal and I were still talking often, she'd kept a notepad by the phone. She'd scribble names, doodles, quotes, and once, while teasing me over an old crush, she'd held it up and shouted, "Do you think CN would ever look at you twice?" At the time, I'd thought it was nonsense, or code, or maybe just her being silly. Now, I wasn't sure, because that signature didn't belong to anyone in the room. And that meant someone had been here, left something, and didn't stay. Or worse, was asked not to. I turned back toward the sanctuary. There were people seated in the shadows, guests who hadn't drifted to the reception hall yet, some elderly, some alone, some simply watching. I scanned them slowly. A man with dark glasses and a stiff jacket caught my eye. He sat near the aisle, facing forward, hands folded. Not crying, just still. He wasn't anyone I recognized. Not from Crystal's college, not from church, not even from the few scattered family reunions I'd been reluctantly invited to. I tucked the frame beneath my arm and walked slowly toward the back pews. When I passed him, I hesitated. "Were you close to my sister?" I asked gently. He turned his head slightly. "I was," he said, "a while ago." His voice was calm, low, the kind that carried more emotion from restraint than from volume. "Did you leave flowers?" He looked surprised, then nodded once. I reached into my coat and showed him the card. "CN?" He gave a small, crooked smile, then stood. "Your mother's watching," he said quietly, and without waiting for me to respond, he slipped past me and walked out the side doors into the cold. I turned. Mom had indeed moved closer, pretending to inspect the photo board, but her eyes had been locked on us the entire time. I held her gaze now. She tilted her head, then turned her back. No confrontation, no demand, just dismissal. But I knew that look. I'd seen it when she found texts from Crystal she didn't like. I'd seen it when Crystal and I laughed too long over inside jokes she didn't understand. It was her way of saying, this part of the story doesn't fit, and suddenly I realized something else. The framed photo I'd found, it had his handwriting on the back, tiny, nearly faded. "Best night, you two are everything." Everything. Not one, not mine, not hers, ours. They hadn't just cut me out. They'd tried to cut him too, but whoever CN was, he wasn't staying gone. And neither was I. I didn't follow the man. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew chasing him now would only make Mom tighten her grip later. She didn't like when people noticed things, especially not her version of the truth. So I circled back into the reception hall, making a slow loop around the tables while pretending to adjust my scarf. My eyes weren't on the guests anymore. They were on what wasn't being said. Crystal's best friend from high school hadn't shown up. Neither had her old roommate from her first job in Denver. I knew because I'd helped Crystal with the guest list when she was still strong enough to type. And we sat in her room for hours, going over who mattered. Back then, she was wearing a knit hat over thinning hair and laughing about people she hadn't spoken to in years. I remembered that night because she'd paused at one name, tapped her pen twice, and whispered, "Mom's gonna hate this." Why? She shrugged. Some people don't fit her frame. Now the reception was full of curated symmetry. Church people, Dad's colleagues, neighbors who hadn't seen Crystal in years but still called her the pretty one. And yet the chair next to Mom, where Crystal had requested I sit in the draft list, was filled by her old piano teacher, the one who once told me I lacked follow-through. I made my way toward the sign-in table, where programs and a condolence journal lay open beneath a gold pen. Next to it sat a box of RSVP cards, folded and neatly arranged, though no one was looking at them. I waited until the coordinator turned to fix a centerpiece. Then I lifted the top card. They weren't blank, they were responses. The original ones. Crystal had asked for written confirmations, partly so she could reread them on hard days. It was her way of feeling connected while bedridden. I knew because I'd mailed the first batch for her. I flipped through a few quickly, careful not to smudge the edges. Dozens of names were crossed out in pencil. Some had a faint no written beside them. Others had check marks, but weren't here. Then I found it, CN handwritten, the same tilt as on the flower card, and beside it, confirmed, +1 if allowed. The line for relationship, private friend, private, not hidden. But Mom didn't like private. She liked permanent, pristine, proper. And this man, whoever he truly was, had been scrubbed like a typo from the final print. So had others. Names with small notes beside them, too casual. Not appropriate. Danielle's connection, not Crystal's. That one made my hand freeze, because it wasn't even about Crystal anymore. It was about me. I looked toward the coat rack where the guests' things were piled. A floral tote sat on top, partially open. Inside was a file folder with a label marked Master List. I moved closer. The room had emptied some. Guests lingering by the dessert trays now. No one noticed when I slid the folder out gently. Inside, 2 printouts. One was the official list given to the funeral coordinator. The other, handwritten, edited in blue ink, was Crystal's original version. Dated, annotated, mine and her handwriting both on its edges. I found my name. Beside it, a star. Her note. Must speak. She deserves to. I stared at it until the lines blurred. That list was real, and someone had ignored it. Not adjusted, not compromised, erased. Someone had looked at Crystal's last wishes and said, no. I slid the folder back and turned away. The air felt thicker now, not just with grief, but with something rancid, like silence that had curdled, because this wasn't about who was gone anymore. It was about who was never supposed to be seen. The reception was thinning. Empty chairs, drained cups, the clatter of folding trays being packed away by volunteers. My mother had disappeared somewhere, maybe to the pastor's office, maybe outside for one of her dramatic phone calls. Dad stood by the punch table, making small talk with Crystal's former choir director, like none of this had ever tilted sideways. I moved through the exit hall quietly, holding the RSVP card in one pocket and Crystal's original list in the other. I didn't know what I'd say when I reached her, but the coordinator deserved to be asked, even if she didn't answer. She was gathering leftover programs into a canvas pouch when I approached. "Hi," I said, soft but direct. She looked up, startled for just a moment. "Yes?" "I'm Crystal's sister." Her posture shifted, not defensive, but alert. "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. You did a lovely job helping organize things." "I didn't organize this." The pause between us expanded. Her hands froze mid-fold. "I wanted to ask," I continued, "about the guest list." She blinked. "Is something wrong?" "There were people Crystal wanted here, they're not." "Well, these events always have last-minute changes. Flights, illness, logistics. Someone changed the list," I said, "after she died." That landed harder than I expected. The coordinator's lips parted, then closed again. She glanced around, then stepped to the side. I don't think we should talk about this in the hallway, she said quickly. Not now. Then when? Her voice dropped. Don't ask me that here. The air shifted. I leaned in. Why? She adjusted her lanyard, stalling. I only go by what's submitted to me, she whispered. We got a finalized version through a third party. I assumed it came from the family, but look, it's not unusual. It wasn't from Crystal, I said. She exhaled. Not quite guilt. Something more like caution. I saw your name on the early list, she admitted. Next to the eulogy, it was printed. I remember because most entries were typed. I stared at her. So why wasn't I allowed to speak? She opened her mouth, then paused again. And instead of answering, she reached into her folder and pulled out a plain white envelope. No label. She slid it toward me, low and discreet. I was told not to include this, but it wasn't my call. I wasn't even supposed to keep it. What is it? She didn't look at me. Just don't open it here. I took it, tucked it into my coat, hand trembling. Footsteps echoed behind me, heels clicking. Mom. I knew that sound anywhere. The coordinator stepped away instantly, pretending to zip her tote. Thank you again, she said in a performative voice. Everything went beautifully. I'm so glad we could honor her in the way she deserved. My mother appeared beside me like a ghost who wore perfume. She smiled thinly at the coordinator, then turned to me. Ready to go? She asked. They're dimming the lights. I forced a nod, just needed a breath. She touched my arm as if in comfort, but her grip was firm, measured, controlling. We're heading to the house, she said. Don't wander, there's still family to greet. I followed her out without a word. In the parking lot, under the deepening twilight, I palmed the envelope in my coat. I didn't know what was inside. But I knew this. Crystal wanted me to speak. Someone made sure I didn't. And someone else? Just passed me a secret they weren't supposed to keep. I didn't open the envelope at the house. There were too many eyes, Mom's especially, watching the way I moved, the way I lingered in hallways, as if she already suspected I had something she'd missed. The family gathering dragged into evening. Cheap casseroles, church coffee, distant cousins asking surface-level questions. Everyone acted like grief was a costume you wore politely, as long as you didn't cry too loudly or ask why your name was never said aloud. Crystal's photo sat in a silver frame near the fireplace. Not the sunflower one. Another, chosen by my mother. A studio portrait retouched until she looked like a magazine model. Clean, controlled, no hint of the girl who used to dance barefoot on the porch in college hoodies and sang off-key while brushing her teeth. I waited until dark. I waited until the story stopped, the dishes clinked one last time, and I slipped quietly through the side door and into my rental car. Only then, with the dome light dimmed and my breath visible on the window, did I open the envelope. The paper inside was folded once, evenly, not new, slightly creased, written in Crystal's unmistakable scrawl. Looped, fast, unfiltered. If you're reading this, something didn't go the way I hoped. I didn't want you to find out this way. I wanted to tell you in person, over milkshakes or a trashy movie night, but things started slipping faster than I could catch them. There's so much I couldn't say at home. You know what they're like. You always knew. Danielle, there's nothing wrong with you. That sounds dramatic, I know, but I needed to say it first, because they'll try to twist it. They always twist things when they feel control slipping. What you are is inconvenient. To them, not to me. You've always made people feel seen, which is exactly why they wanted you invisible here. I left something for you. It's not much, but it's where the real story is. Ask CN. He kept the file, because I couldn't. Don't trust what they tell you about my choices. About who I was near the end. I wasn't confused, I wasn't fading, I was furious, and I was clear. You were the only one I trusted to still be there when it mattered. So if you're reading this, it matters now. No signature, no goodbye. Just a final line written faster than the rest. I'm not sorry for anything except how long I waited to say this. I sat frozen in the car, the letter trembled in my lap. Crystal hadn't just been silenced, she'd been watching it happen. And now, her letter wasn't just a goodbye, it was a warning, a push, a map. The edges of everything began to shift. This wasn't just grief anymore, it wasn't just being excluded or erased, it was deeper, older. A pattern I'd been tiptoeing around for years, too polite to call cruelty by its name. And now, Crystal had pulled back the curtain. With her last strength, she didn't just leave memories, she left instructions. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my coat, folded the letter, and tucked it deep into the glove box. CN had the file, and I wasn't going to let anyone stop me from finding him again, because whatever they'd erased from the memorial, she had made sure it survived somewhere else. It took 2 days and 3 wrong numbers to find him. The initials CN were all I had, along with a vague memory of Crystal teasing me about him and the blurry photo I'd snapped of him at the funeral before he slipped away. But I remembered his coat. I remembered the way he'd said, "Your mother's watching." I started with the RSVP card. The handwriting matched a return address I found folded behind another sympathy note. That return address led to a florist's order, hydrangeas in a black vase, the only one that hadn't matched Mom's aesthetic. That florist pointed me to a pickup order. Cash. No record, but there was a name on the receipt stub. Chris Nolan. When I finally reached him, it wasn't on a phone. It was at a library of all places. A quiet university archive office on the edge of town where he worked part-time digitizing old records. He didn't look surprised when I showed up. He just looked sad. "She told me you might come," he said, eyes soft, "though I didn't think you'd be allowed." I wasn't. We sat in a study room surrounded by silent shelves. No parents, no curated grief, just 2 people who had been left with the weight of someone else's truth. "She mentioned you were close," I said. Chris nodded. "She called me her backup file." "What does that mean?" He reached into his satchel and pulled out a manila folder, thick and worn at the edges. "She started documenting things the last 6 months," he said. Emails, conversations, her medical decisions, things they were rewriting after the fact. I stared at the folder. She didn't trust them. "Would you?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. He opened the folder. Inside, scans of hospital forms, notes from therapists, a letter from a social worker, printouts of texts between Crystal and our parents, some redacted by hand, some underlined in red. "She asked me to hold this because she knew what they'd do," Chris said. "They'd paint a clean version, one where she drifted away peacefully, quietly, without resistance." I looked up. "And did she?" He closed the folder gently. "No, she was angry, but precise. She wasn't confused, Danielle. She was clearer than I've ever seen anyone facing what she did." Tears welled up in my throat before I could stop them. "She didn't say goodbye," I whispered. "She said she didn't want to say goodbye until you could see the whole picture." I blinked hard. "She was going to send you this," he said. "But things moved faster than we expected. I tried to give it to the coordinator. I thought maybe it'd find its way to you." "It did." Chris hesitated. "There's something else," he said. He reached into the folder and pulled out a small USB stick. "She recorded something a week before. She didn't want it shown at the memorial. Said that wasn't her space anymore." He slid it across the table. "She wanted you to hear it when you were ready. I didn't touch it, not yet." "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," I said. Chris leaned back. "That's the wrong question." "What do you mean?" He looked at me carefully. Not pitying, just serious. "She didn't leave you this to decide. She left it because you already knew." I looked down at the stick, at the folder, at the truth I hadn't asked for but now couldn't unhold. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be about grief, it would be about truth, and who had the right to tell it? I didn't plug the USB stick in right away. I took it back to the rental, placed it on the hotel desk like it was something volatile. I showered, sat on the bed, watched the ceiling spin in the shadows. Every time I reached for it, my heart beat louder. Not with fear, something worse. Expectation. Because I knew Crystal, and Crystal never left anything halfway. When I finally slid the USB into my laptop and opened the only file inside, I saw the timestamp, 7 days before her death. Early morning, just under 20 minutes. She looked tired in the video. Not just physically, tired the way someone gets when they've been erasing themselves one conversation at a time. But she smiled when she looked at the camera. Not big, not forced, just soft. "Okay, so, if you're watching this, it means the version they told you didn't sit right. Good. That means you're still you." Her voice cracked but steadied. "They keep saying I'm confused, that the meds are making me emotional, that I don't understand what's best for me, but I do. I understand exactly what they're doing. They're rewriting the story before I'm even gone." She leaned closer to the lens. "Danielle, I saw it happen the first time you brought me soup and Mom made you eat in the hallway because she said your tone upset me." I saw it when you tried to ask about the treatment plan and Dad told you it was too complicated. She laughed bitterly. It's not complicated, it's strategic. They didn't want a witness, not one like you. You're the only person who ever asked what I wanted without trying to manage it. My throat tightened. They told people I didn't want a funeral, that I didn't want to be remembered with speeches or stories or music, but I did. I just didn't want their version. She paused. Her breath was shaky now. I wanted you to speak. I wanted you to read the letter I wrote about that day in the hospital, when you held my hand and made me laugh even though I'd just thrown up on my pillow. I wanted people to know that was my life too, not just the perfect GPA, not just the smiles. She reached behind her and pulled out a thin notebook. Chris has this. I wrote everything down, every contradiction, every message they deleted, every time they pushed me to name Kira as next of kin, even when I said no. I froze. Kira wasn't just our cousin. She was Mom's mirror image. Sweet, obedient, always dressed to match the moment. They couldn't stand that I kept talking to you. They said you'd turn it into drama, that you'd make it about yourself. Crystal looked right into the camera now. You never did. You just listened. She wiped her face, then looked off camera, maybe at Chris. If you're ready, show them. Not for me, I'm gone. Show them because it matters who gets to tell the ending. Then she reached out and stopped the recording. The screen went black, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric, full. I sat for a long time, hands clenched in my lap, not crying, just becoming the version of myself they'd always tried to erase. The one Crystal believed in. She hadn't asked me to avenge her, she'd asked me to restore her. And now, I knew exactly where to start. I didn't knock when I walked in. The front door was unlocked, always was. A false sense of safety wrapped in suburban rituals. Dad was in the living room, watching one of those afternoon court shows like nothing had happened. Mom was nowhere in sight, but I heard her voice humming from the kitchen, something classical, controlled, predictable. I stepped inside, the USB still clutched in my coat pocket. The recording burned in my mind like a second heartbeat. Crystal had been careful, brave, and she'd trusted me. Danielle? Dad turned surprised, his mouth lifted in what I think was supposed to be a smile. Didn't expect you back so soon. I didn't answer, just moved to the coffee table, placed the folder Chris had given me on top of a stack of magazines. It sat there like a landmine. What's that? He asked. Mom emerged with a glass of tea and stopped when she saw it. Her body stiffened, but she didn't speak. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB, held it up like a match about to strike. This, I said, is Crystal. Mom's hand twitched. Danielle? No, you don't get to Danielle me. Dad frowned. What is this about? I looked between them, their matching postures, their rehearsed confusion. She knew, I said. She knew everything. They didn't blink. She knew you cut people from the funeral. She knew about Kira, about the medical forms you altered, about the list she left that you edited without her consent. Dad took a step forward. You don't understand. I do, I snapped. Finally, because she left the truth with someone you didn't control. And now I have it. I turned to Mom. She said you made her feel like an inconvenience. Mom's jaw set. We were trying to protect her dignity. Her dignity? By pretending she didn't want a memorial? By erasing the people she loved? She was sick, Mom said. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was clear, more than either of you have ever been. Silence fell heavy between us. Then Mom's voice shifted, cool, coaxing. Danielle, grief is making you emotional. You need to step back and consider how this looks. I have, I cut in. I considered what it looked like when you made sure I didn't get to speak. When her voice, the only real one in the room, was scrubbed from her own goodbye. Dad stepped between us now. What exactly do you think you're going to do? I leaned forward. I'm going to play it. Their eyes widened. I'm going to let people hear the woman you tried to curate into silence. At the next family gathering, at her alma mater, anywhere she's remembered, I'll be there, with her. Mom's voice sharpened. You wouldn't dare. She dared. I stared at them both. Neither moved. Their silence wasn't confusion, it was calculation, and I'd just blown the one thing they relied on, control. She asked me to restore her, I said, and I will. Then I turned, walked out, and let the door close behind me. I didn't slam it, I didn't have to. The sound of their legacy cracking open was loud enough. The auditorium wasn't full, but it didn't need to be. It was her campus, her chosen space. The small performing arts building Crystal had spent hours inside, rehearsing monologues, coaching freshmen through stage fright, arguing with professors about authenticity versus polish. They were holding a tribute for her, something small, informal, not publicized by the family. A few classmates had organized it, people who actually knew her beyond holiday dinners and curated family updates. I didn't tell mom or dad I'd be speaking. I didn't ask permission because I didn't need it. The student who organized the mic lineup gave me a surprised nod when I approached. I was the last slot. "We weren't sure you'd come," she whispered. I handed her the USB. "I'm not here to talk," she frowned. "Then what's—" "Just play the file." She studied me, hesitated, but something in my face must have convinced her. She moved toward the booth and spoke into the technician's headset. The room dimmed, a hush fell, and then the screen lit up. Crystal appeared, pale, direct. Her voice was quieter through the speakers, but every word cut clean. "If you're watching this, it means the version they told you didn't sit right. Good." I stood in the back, behind the last row. No spotlight, no applause, just her. 20 minutes passed like thunder wrapped in silence. No one coughed, no one shifted. A few people covered their mouths, one girl sobbed openly. And when the screen finally faded to black, there was no applause. There was breath, collective, unsteady. Then someone whispered, "Thank you." And the room broke. Tears, hugs, a wave of emotional noise as people moved toward the exits, eyes red, voices hushed, hearts louder than their feet. The organizer turned to me. "Did her parents know?" I shook my head. "They do now." My phone buzzed before I even left the parking lot. 3 missed calls, 4 messages, all from Mom. I let them sit, let them wait. It wasn't about defiance, it was about justice. I drove in silence for 20 minutes until I reached a small diner near the freeway where Crystal and I used to meet between semesters. I ordered a milkshake, sat in her favorite booth, and finally opened the messages. "What did you do?" "You had no right. We never authorized that." "Danielle, you've gone too far." "Too far? No. Too long silenced. Too often erased." I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through social media. The student tribute had already been shared, a shaky video. The caption read, "Her real voice, her real story, no edits." Comments poured in, people remembering Crystal for her wit, her strength, her rage, professors weighing in with stories of her defiance and brilliance, old friends confirming what I already knew. This was the version of her that mattered, and now it couldn't be buried. My milkshake came. I stirred it with a spoon, staring at the swirl. She should have been here. Arguing about toppings, making faces at the diner art. But if she couldn't be, at least her voice still was. And now, the ones who tried to mute it, they were finally being heard. For the silence they forced. 3 days after the video tribute, the first headline appeared. It wasn't a major outlet, just a regional lifestyle blog. But the title was direct. "Sister of late grad shares powerful truth, sparks debate over family narrative." Within hours, it spread, not because of me, because of her. Crystal's voice, her clarity, her unflinching calm. People were quoting her like scripture. I knew it would happen. What I didn't expect was the knock on my apartment door that morning. It was my aunt, Mom's sister. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "I need to talk to you," she said, stepping in without waiting for an answer. "And you need to know, your mom's unraveling." I blinked. "She's calling everyone, the cousins, my church friends, trying to do damage control. But it's not working, Danielle. People saw that recording. They believed Crystal." I sat, pulse low but tight. "She said you were coming by." My aunt paused, pulled something from her purse, a yellowed envelope. "She didn't want you to see this, not ever, but I think it's time." She placed it on the table. "I found this 10 years ago, hidden in the back of your grandmother's piano bench." I stared at the envelope. It had no name, no date, just a seal and a faint watermark that looked almost official. "What is it?" "Something Crystal was never supposed to find, something your parents have spent years pretending doesn't exist." I opened it slowly. Inside, a letter, typed, short. "To whom it may concern, this document serves as confirmation that the listed dependent, Danielle Jean Harper, is the sole named beneficiary of the education endowment established in her name by the late Leonard Harper." I froze. My grandfather. My mom's dad. A trust? I kept reading. Funds are to be made available upon Danielle's enrollment at any accredited university, provided she maintains academic standing. Under no circumstances may this fund be transferred, reassigned, or withheld by legal guardian or parent. The signature was notarized. The date? 12 years ago. I looked up. She always said there was nothing left. I whispered. That we had to use what was in the house. That Crystal needed it more. My aunt nodded, tight-lipped. They lied. The air thinned. She used my college trust. Crystal didn't know, she said quickly. She always thought her scholarship covered everything. But your mom? She rerouted the account, used her authority as trustee to reroute the disbursement in Crystal's name when she applied. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. A part of me wanted to burn the letter. Another part wanted to blow it up on every projector in town. That's why they silenced her, I murmured. Because if she ever found out, she was starting to, my aunt said. That's what scared them. Everything shifted. My grief, my fury, my loyalty, it all crystallized. This wasn't just about her voice, it was about why they fought so hard to erase it. Because the silence was never about grief, it was about guilt. And now I had something they couldn't bury under polite smiles and floral centerpieces. Proof? I took the letter to the one place they hadn't locked down with grief platitudes and floral deflections. A law office. Not theirs, not the one Mom used for estate matters. The original attorney listed on the notarization, Calvin D. Merriweather, J.D., retired technically, but still took selective cases from his garden-facing home 2 towns over. He opened the door himself, thin man, crisp posture, sharp eyes that tracked mine with unnerving precision. You're Leonard's granddaughter, he said before I introduced myself. Yes, Danielle Harper. I figured this might come up someday. He gestured inside. Come in. The home smelled like jasmine and paper, walls lined with law books, faded photos, degrees. I followed him to a wood-paneled study where he sat behind a desk older than my parents' marriage. He didn't offer me coffee, didn't need to. I handed him the trust copy. He skimmed it, nodded. I remember this one. Leonard wanted her to have a chance, said she needed an exit if the house went sideways. She being me? He looked up. You? Yes, not Crystal. I took a slow breath. Then how was the trust rerouted? His mouth twitched. Ah. That sound said more than any testimony. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound registry. I keep hard records, one of the last who do. He flipped pages. There it is, 2010, trust revision request. Filed under Harper, Danielle Jean. He turned the book toward me. My mother's signature sat beside a line item marked, Temporary Educational Disbursement Transfer. Wait, temporary? He nodded. The transfer was conditional, requires reinstatement approval within 18 months. And was it? He shook his head. No paperwork, no extension, which means the trust technically reverted to its original terms 2 years ago. I sat back, stunned. She said there was no money left. She either misunderstood or hoped you never questioned it. She's not someone who misunderstands legal language. He met my eyes. No, she's not. Silence stretched. Then he leaned forward. I remember Crystal. Came here once with your grandfather. Smart kid. Asked good questions. She never knew this happened, I said. She would have found out, he replied. That's what your mother feared. Leonard had me update the contact list 2 months before his stroke. If Crystal had requested records, she'd have seen the whole ledger. The ledger, the emails, the forms rerouted and altered. Mom hadn't just borrowed the trust, she'd buried it, used Crystal's diagnosis like fog, shielded herself with sympathy while stripping me of the only thing our grandfather left behind in my name. I stood. Can I get a certified copy? He gave me a long measuring look, then pulled out a fresh form. Sit down, I'll prepare it. As he typed, the room filled with a new kind of quiet. Not grief, not memory, purpose. This wasn't just a case of financial betrayal, it was a pattern, erasure by strategy, love weaponized into leverage, loss used to gaslight reality. And now I had something tangible, undeniable. The woman who silenced Crystal was about to face the only thing she couldn't reinterpret, a documented timeline she didn't control, and I was going to hand it to her myself. I didn't mean to interrupt a gathering. I didn't even know there was one. But when I stepped through my parents' front door, certified envelope in hand, I heard voices. Multiple. Laughter, the soft clinking of forks on porcelain, plates on their best china, a table full of cousins. Kira, Uncle Mark, a few of Mom's book club friends, the whole ecosystem of people they used to control the narrative. And in the middle of it, my parents. Mom saw me first. Her smile, mid-fake laugh, cracked like a dropped mask. "Danielle," she said, rising slowly, "we weren't expecting—" "No," I said, "you weren't." Everyone turned. The room froze like a painting. I walked to the head of the table, set the envelope down next to the centerpiece. Crystal's old hair ribbon was tied around it, a subtle rebellion. "I thought you might want to see what else got left out of the memorial." Dad stood now too. "Danielle, this isn't the time." "Isn't it?" I looked around the table. "Because apparently the time was every other moment you excluded me. Every version of Crystal's story you edited, every time you smiled through silence like it was grace." Mom's eyes flicked to the envelope. "What is this?" "Proof." Dad's voice dropped. "Of what?" I turned to him, slowly, deliberately. "Of theft, of manipulation, of a trust fund established by Grandpa for me that was funneled into Crystal's tuition without my knowledge. Then forgotten when it reverted." Kira shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Mark frowned. Mom reached for the envelope. I placed my hand over it. "Not yet." A beat of silence, then I raised my voice. Not shouting, just enough to carry. "I don't care what this looks like. I care what it is, and what it is documented, certified, confirmed." I lifted the envelope and dropped it in front of Mom. "Do you remember telling me I was selfish for asking about financial aid? That I should be grateful Crystal got the help and not try to compete with her illness?" She didn't respond. "I believed you," I said. "I believed I was less deserving." People were whispering now. Dad stepped forward. "We did what we thought was best." "No," I said. "You did what was easiest, what wouldn't cause waves. You gambled I'd stay quiet because I always had." Mom's face twitched. "You brought this to our doorstep." "No," I said coldly. "You did. When you lied, when you erased her, when you made sure the version of Crystal people remembered was the one who stayed convenient." Kira stood suddenly. "She didn't know," she said quietly. "If she had, she wouldn't have—" "I know," I said. "She would have burned it all down herself." And for a second, I saw it. The doubt cracked through them all. The carefully arranged family scaffolding, swaying. Then Mom did what she always did when she lost the room. She smiled. "You've made your point, Danielle." "No," I said, grabbing the envelope again. "Not yet. Because this time, I wasn't stopping at awareness. This time, I had a plan. And every one of them was about to learn what Crystal already knew. Silence isn't grace, and survival isn't submission." The folder in my hand felt heavier than it was. I left my parents' house without a single raised voice behind me. That silence, thick, charged, was more explosive than screaming. They knew, even the ones pretending not to. And by the time I walked into Merriweather's office the next morning, the trust folder was no longer proof. It was ammunition. He looked up as I entered. "I thought you'd come back." I placed the envelope on his desk. "They want it buried again." He didn't ask who they were. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out the original trust's amendment options. "Are you ready to enact the restoration clause?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I want to take it further." He leaned back. "How far?" "As far as it goes." I pointed to a section he hadn't flagged before. "This clause here about wrongful diversion of educational funds, what happens if I submit a claim?" He skimmed the line, blinked, then looked at me. "You'd trigger a default penalty. If found valid, the funds must be restored in full, with interest, and the party responsible barred from managing any remaining family accounts." "So," I said, "they'd lose control of everything they're still sitting on." "Yes," he said slowly, "and their names would be flagged in estate court records for future review." I stared at the page, then signed. "This isn't about the money," I said. "I know," he replied, "but they made it about power. So now I will too." He stamped the papers, made 2 notarized copies, and placed one in my hand. "Where are you taking that?" he asked. "Where it began," I said. The community center was Crystal's idea. Back when she was healthy enough to think beyond textbooks and treatments, she dreamed of starting an arts outreach program for kids who couldn't afford lessons. She said the walls didn't need to be fancy, just soundproof enough to scream safely inside. They held a memorial plaque for her there now. I scheduled a public event for scholarship launch, used the trust restoration as seed funding, invited press. I didn't tell my parents, but someone did, because halfway through my speech, while I stood beneath Crystal's name carved in stone, they arrived. Mom in a beige coat that looked like denial. Dad with folded arms and a face carved from marble. I didn't flinch. This trust, I continued, holding up the certified copy, was originally created by my grandfather, Leonard Harper, for my education. It was rerouted, erased, and quietly discarded. Gasps. People shifted. Eyes widened. But now, I said, it's restored, and not just in name. I stepped aside. Behind me, the new plaque was unveiled, the Crystal Jean Harper Voice Unbound Fund. For those who were told silence was safer, the room erupted. Applause, tears. My mother stood frozen. Until someone from the county clerk's office, invited by Meriwether, stepped forward with a second envelope. Mrs. Harper, the man said, you've been served. Her hand didn't reach for it. Mine did. I held it out. This is yours, I said softly. Every choice, every silence, every lie. She looked like someone trying not to crumble, like she still believed there was a version of events she could explain her way back into. But not this time. This time, Crystal had the final word. And I was her echo. I didn't expect anything to arrive after the lawsuit. Not a call, not a letter. But a week later, a package showed up at my apartment. No return address, just a simple hand-printed label in crooked Sharpie. Inside, a small wooden box, smooth heavy. Taped beneath it, a note in brittle handwriting. From my grandmother, the one they never quoted, the one they kept in the background like a stage prop, always smiling, always quiet. I unfolded the page. If you're reading this, then the rest have lost the script. Good. Crystal asked me to keep this for you. I waited too long to decide if I should honor it. I'm sorry. I stared at the box. The lock had no key, just a twist mechanism. When I turned it, something inside clicked, then slid. A small bundle of letters, a USB, and a photograph. Crystal and I, summer fair. I was 10, she was 12. She had cotton candy on her nose, and I was mid-laugh, head thrown back. I didn't remember the photo being taken. I opened the first letter, dated 6 months before her death. Hey you, if you're reading this, you already know more than I ever dared say out loud. My breath caught. I didn't mean to take what was yours. I didn't know about the trust until right before things turned. When I asked Mom about it, she got that voice, the one she saves for making people feel crazy. I gripped the page tighter. I wasn't strong enough to blow it up, not then. But I knew you would be. I've watched them twist you into the quiet one, the good daughter, the one who never makes waves. But I saw you, Danny, every time you bit your tongue, every time you backed down. You're not weak, you're just waiting. I was crying before I hit the last line, so if you're holding this, it means you stopped waiting, and I love you for it. I read it 3 more times, then reached for the USB. I didn't need a screen, not now, not yet. Instead, I walked to the front window, watched the dusk stretch across the city. My phone buzzed, a message from Kira. She's not leaving the house. No one's really talking to them. I stared at it, typed, deleted, then typed again. You never asked what she wanted. Sent, no answer, didn't need one. Because the truth wasn't just out now, it had roots. The scholarship fund had over 200 applicants in its first week. 3 media outlets had picked up the story. Crystal's voice was everywhere I turned, and for the first time, it wasn't being misquoted. I didn't forgive them, not yet, maybe not ever. But I'd stopped letting them shape the silence. That was mine now, ours, and it rang louder than anything they could say.